Yo, what's going on, boys? How you guys doing today? Welcome back to another 2 video. And in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at a build for the Grandmaster Nightfalls. Now, the GMs begin this week, and so I wanted to get a video out here so you guys can pretty much have a build ready for any GM. This build is going to be able to succeed in every Grandmaster this season because it utilizes pretty much a lot of the brand new mods to essentially make you into an unkillable hunter that's constantly just jolting, bolt charging, and just blinding a bunch of enemies. And with this build, you're also going to be able to take care of all 3 champions all by yourself, so you'll never have to rely on some teammates. Another version of this build is pretty much what helped me survive during all the encounters in the contest dungeon, so I definitely know that it works in in-game content. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you do, remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel in case you guys aren't already for more builds, especially since later on we'll have more builds that are specified for each GM, if that's what you're looking for. But let's get into it. And let's start first with our exotics. Now, starting off with our exotic piece of armor, we are going to be on the Gifted Conviction. This thing gives us some crazy survivability. Every time that we activate our Ascension or Tempest Strike, we release bouncing explosives that jolt targets. And any targets that we jolt, no matter how we jolt them, whether it's with the Ascension, Tempest Strike, with some of our weapon perks, with our grenades, we're going to be gaining some damage resistance. And this is basically what's going to give us most of our survivability. This thing gives us a crazy amount of damage resistance, and with the things that we have on this build, we can basically always have this thing stacked up at least to 3 or 4 times, meaning that we really have just a ton of damage resistance and we can tank a ton of damage. Even in the middle of like a bunch of enemies, we'll still be fine. This chest piece, with some of the changes that we got this season and some of the mods that we got this season as well, has essentially been supercharged into just like an S tier Hunter armor piece. I felt that before it was pretty good, but it definitely wasn't as good as it is this season. It is just like the best it has ever been. Now for the weapon, I think this build is gonna work the best, and also my favorite weapon to run with this build is just the Delicate Tomb. This thing got tons of just buffs this season, and it also just works really well with all the mods that we're running, and even the weapon itself is also gonna be jolting targets, also helping us keep our damage resistance, and just adding even more jolt to the build that already has a lot of jolt. And if you have the catalyst, it gets even better, because whenever you collect an Ionic Trace, it just reloads this weapon, meaning that you never actually have to like manually reload it. This weapon is just like the perfect one for the build. It synergizes with the mods and the artifact, with our fragments, with our aspects. Everything kind of affects this weapon, and it also helps the build by jolting targets, and also making a ton of Ionic Traces so we can keep spamming our arc abilities, which is the main thing that we're going to be doing with this. Now, if you're not a big fan of the Delicate Tomb, or for some reason just don't want to use it, you could also use the Edge Series or the Edge of Concurrence. Both of them are going to work pretty well, but they don't have as much synergy into the build as a Delicate Tomb, but they are arc special weapons, which is what we're looking for. Now, your other 2 weapons are kind of going to change depending on the knife you're doing. The Delicate Tomb is going to be able to stun overloads, but not all the time. But since we have so many other things to stun overloads just built into the class, that's not really an issue. So the main champions that you kind of want to worry about with your weapons are going to be the barriers, so sidearms, and also the unstoppables, which you can also use a linear fusion rifle for that. I would recommend a linear since we're already using a fusion rifle, so we can just double up on particle deconstruction and just do tons of just extra damage. If you make it an arc one, that's even better, but I know not everyone has like really good arc linears, so any linear could work. And since this is a fairly close range build, we're basically always in the middle of enemies, having a sidearm is never an issue, since you're always going to be close enough where you're going to be able to shoot the barriers with the sidearm. Now for our subclass, we are going to be on just pure arc. I think this works the best just with exotic armor, and we can get the most out of it. Now for your super, you can go with either Gathering Storm or Arc Staff. Both of them really would work. Now moving on to our abilities, you want to be on the Gambler's Dodge. Our melee is a big part of the build, so we want to get it as much as we can. So this is going to make it just so we can use it a lot more often. Now for your grenade, you want to go with the Flashbang Grenade. This is my favorite grenade, especially in endgame content. It can blind enemies, so they're just a lot easier to kill. It can stun champions. It's the Unstoppables with the blind as well. And it also has a fairly short cooldown, so you can actually use it quite often. And even the damage that it does is actually pretty decent. So it pretty much has everything that you would want for a grenade in endgame content, so this is just like the best one. Now moving on to the aspects, the first one is going to be Ascension. Ascension is going to be like the main ability we're going to be spamming, and this thing just does so many different things. It's going to jolt targets, it's going to give us Amplified, is going to get our melee back if we use it near enemies, and it's also going to give us some damage resistance because now whenever we gain amplified, we gain damage resistance. And that is without also mentioning the damage resistance we're going to be getting for jolting targets with this. So just activating this next to some enemies is essentially going to give us just 40% damage resistance just right out the bat before using any of the other abilities or actually using our weapons. So this thing is going to be fantastic, and with the very short cooldown that it's got, it means that we can just constantly spam it and constantly keep ourselves amplified and everything else jolted. Now our second aspect, the Tempest Strike, is going to do two main things. It's going to be jolting targets, and it's also going to give us a ton of bolt charge anytime that we defeat any jolted targets. And those targets don't have to necessarily be jolted by the Tempest Strike. If you already jolted a bunch of things with, let's say, the Fusion Rifle or Ascension, if you hit them with Tempest Strike and kill them, then all those skills are going to be turned into bolt charge, so we can start dropping those big lightnings and do some big damage. One thing that I also forgot to mention with Ascension is that it will also proc your bolt charge. So if your bolt charge is ready, you're actually going to be able to proc it with Ascension, and whenever you jolt everything, you also bring down the bolt charge lightning, basically just wiping things out, or doing some pretty big damage to some of the bigger enemies. Tempest Strike also got some pretty nice buffs this season, including just that straight up damage increase, meaning there's a lot more damage to some of the bigger enemies, while just pretty much one-shotting any smaller enemy. The damage on it is no joke now. Definitely we want to spam this as much as we can. Now when playing with this build, you usually want to start with Tempest Strike to jolt a couple targets, maybe get some bolt charge, then you go for an Ascension so you can regain your Tempest Strike, as well as jolt some more targets. Then when you hit the ground, you hit your Tempest Strike again, and if you already have your dodge back, then you could use your Ascension again. We're basically just going to be chaining these abilities on each other as much as we can, and with all the energy that we're going to be getting from killing jolted targets, is something that we can do very easily. Now moving on to the fragments, the very first one we're going to have here is probably going to be the most important one to the build, and is the Spark of Beacons. Whenever we get some final blows with our special or heavy arc weapons, we create blind explosions. And this is something that can happen just over and over again. There's actually not a cooldown in between the activations for Spark of Beacons. So as long as we keep getting kills with our special weapon, our heavy weapon, we're just constantly going to be blinding targets. And then the blinded targets, they're just a lot easier to deal with. This means that you can basically just go blinding tons and tons of targets, since we're always going to be amplified, and our main weapon that we're going to be using is an arc special weapon with the Delicate Tomb. So even if they're not the ones that I mentioned, you always want to have an arc special weapon with this build. It just makes it so much better, and when everything is blinded, nothing really stands in your way. Next up, we're going to have the Spark Resistance. Whenever we're surrounded, we're more resistant to incoming damage. And this is going to be able to stack up with all the damage resistance we're already getting from being amplified, and also from our chest piece, making us even tankier, allowing us to basically just be able to stay in the middle of enemies, tanking a bunch of damage, just spamming abilities, and always keeping us alive. We're also going to have a couple other things that are going to help us stay alive that have to do with the artifact. Next, we're going to have the Spark of Ions. Whenever we defeat a jolted target or defeat a target with bolt charge, we're going to create Ionic Traces. This gives a very consistent way of making some Ionic Traces, so we can get our abilities back faster every time that we pick up an Ionic Trace, and so we can also power up our Delicate Tomb and also auto-reload it. So overall, you just want to make as many Ionic Traces as we can. It works really well with the build. After that, we're going to have the Spark of Discharge. This is going to give us another way of creating Ionic Traces by being able to create them with our arc weapons, meaning our Fusion Rifle is going to be creating them most of the time. And also whenever we collect the Ionic Trace, it's also going to give us a stack of bolt charge, so we're actually going to be able to spam a lot more bolt charge than you would think with this build. Even though this build mostly focuses on jolt, you would be surprised with the amount of bolt charge we can actually spam out there, just because the amount of Ionic Traces we actually pick up, and the kills that we get with our Tempest Strike. And the final fragment is going to be the Spark of Frequency, and this is really what pushes it over the ledge and just lets us spam bolt charge just over and over again. Not because of the primary effect, but because of the secondary. Whenever we're amplified, we gain increased stacks of bolt charge from all sources. So instead of just getting one bolt charge every time that we pick up an Ionic Trace, we actually get 2 thanks to this fragment, meaning that we only need 5 Ionic Traces to do bolt charge, without counting all the bolt charge we're going to be getting from doing weapon damage, and also from getting kills with our Tempest Strike. So you can pretty much see what we've got going on here. We're going to be able to spam bolt charge just so much that a lot of the time you don't even see that you actually have it ready, and it just keeps happening over and over again. You just kind of hear the lightning strikes go off. You don't really have to worry about building it up. It's just something that you're always just doing just passively. You're always just putting some more damage out there. You're always jolting, you're always blinding, and dropping those lightning strikes for some extra damage, or at clear, depending on when they go off. Now moving on to the artifact, the main ones we're going to be using are going to be the arc ones, but also a couple of other ones. Now from this first column right here, you basically just want to pick up the weapons that you're going to be using, and those pretty much are going to change from strike to strike. Now moving on to the second one, you definitely want to take over Cloak and Load. This is going to give us some increased handling and reload speed whenever we're amplified or bolt charge, and since we're always going to be that, this basically just means that it's always on. Even with a strand weapon in your kinetic slot, you also want to have unraveling orbs, so you can have unraveling rounds. From this middle row, we have probably our most important mod of this build, which is going to be Dielectric. Whenever we defeat arc debuff targets, it gives us bolt charge. And since we're always going to be debuffing targets with either the blind or with the jolting, that means that we're going to get even more bolt charge, meaning that we can spam bolt charge even more. And this is one that you definitely want to boost, because the boosted version just makes it even better and increases our survivability even more. Whenever we rapidly defeat arc debuff targets, we're going to spawn some orbs of power, so we're actually going to be making lots of orbs with this build. And it's also going to straight up heal us, so this is just some built-in healing right into the build. And this actually procs a lot more than you would expect. So if you guys have been wondering why I just randomly get healed, it's because of this mod right here. And if you guys don't know how to do the boost, all you gotta do is come to the Tome of Want and essentially just put whatever you want in here. As long as it's got something active, the mod is gonna be boosted. So now when we go back to our artifact here, now you see that it's activated. So just remember to do this before you go into the GM, and it's basically gonna be active for the whole thing. It's essentially active till you finish a couple of activities, so it's active for a while. For the next row, Dreadful Finisher and Flashover are both going to be really good. Flashover is going to give our bolt charge lightning bolts just more damage, so they'll be able to just chunk people a little more or kill some more ants. And Dreadful Finisher will let us get some special ammo every time that we defeat some powerful combatants like yellow bars, and if we defeat some subjugators, tormentors, or champions, they spawn even more ammo. So this is just really nice to have, since it means that every champion that we finish kind of translates into a ton of special ammo. And for your final row on the artifact, you definitely want particle deconstruction, especially if you also went with a linear in your heavy slot, so you can get some more damage out there. When you stack it up, your delicate tomb is going to be doing a ton of damage, especially up close. And you also want to go with Defibrillating Blast, which means every time that you stun a champion, you immediately get mad stacks of bolt charge, meaning that you can do a bolt charge just right away. And it also triggers an arc bolt that heals you and also jolts enemies. So it essentially just gives another way of jolting and healing, just adding even more to the build. The build is already really good, but this is just like the cherry on top, making the build even better. And lastly, let's take a look at the armor mods we have on this build. First, let's start with the helmet. We have Harmonic Siphon, so our arc weapons can make some orbs. And we're also going to have Special Ammo Scout, as well as Special Ammo Finder. Since a special weapon is like the thing that we're maining, we definitely always want to be top on the special ammo. For our gauntlets, we're going to have Bolstering Detonation and Focusing Strike, so whenever we do some damage with a grenade or melee, we're going to be getting some class ability energy back, so we can use a class ability a lot more often. And also Heavy Handed will make it so we just make some orbs every time that we get some kills with our charged melee. And these two mods are going to count the Tempest Strike, so we're actually going to be making a lot of orbs with Heavy Handed, since the Tempest Strike is really good at killing enemies. Now for your chest piece, you want to go for some resistances, as well as maybe some reserves depending on how you're feeling about the resistances. I definitely say that you always want to have a concussive dampener on, and then wherever the surge or threat actually is. I said surge, but I meant threat. Yeah, whatever the threat is. I think in the master this week it was Void, that's why I have Void. And then the last one could be either Harmonic Resistance or Reserves, depending on like what you value more. Do you want more survivability? Then go with Resistance. Or do you want to make sure you always have ammo? Then go for Reserves. For your boots, you want to go with Stacks on Stacks, Insulation, and Recuperation. Recuperation will make you heal whenever you pick up some orbs. Insulation will make it so your class ability comes back faster when you pick up orbs. And Stacks on Stacks is going to let us have an additional stack of bolt charge just so we can get some more. And lastly, for the class item, we just have 2 utility kickstarts, baby, so we can spam our class ability even more. And that's why we have stacks and stacks, just so we can get the most out of these utility kickstarts, so we can spam even more class ability, since the class ability is like the main thing of the build. The more we spam our class ability, the more melees we get, and the more jolted targets we have. So these are going to be the mods that we have on this build. And with that, that's actually going to be the end of the build. You guys pretty much know everything about this build, so now you can go into any GM and have a pretty good time. Like always, there's going to be a dim link in the description and also in the comments below in case you guys want to give this build a try. And if you guys do, remember to come back here and just tell me what you guys thought of the build. And if you ended up making some changes, you want to make some changes on your own experiment, go for it. Just come back here and let me know how it went. Now when playing with this build, like I said before, you always want to start with your Tempest Strike. Always get that one out there, because as soon as you activate your class ability, you're going to get back. So you always kind of want to use it first before using your class ability, so you can always just keep the ability chaining going. In the middle of doing that, you could also shoot some things with your fusion rifle. Your fusion rifle is going to be doing a lot of damage, and it's also going to constantly jolt targets, meaning that it keeps that damage resistance up. And every time that you get some kills with the fusion rifle, you're going to be making ionic traces, you're going to be blinding a bunch of targets, jolting a bunch of targets, so you definitely want to incorporate the fusion rifle into the build. This is one of my favorite builds this season, so I hope you guys like it. I feel like the aggressiveness plus the simplicity and the effectiveness of the build make it just such a nice build. I'm probably one of the best builds that I've played with in a very long time. It is going to be very hard moving away from a build like this, because just how satisfying it is. Spamming your abilities, jolting targets, bolt charging, blinding a bunch of things, just constantly healing, tanking a ton of damage. It is just a fantastic build. And if you're a big fan of aggressive PvE builds, then you're gonna love this build for sure. But with that, we're gonna end today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, hopefully you guys liked it. If you guys haven't, make sure you subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care everyone, have a good rest of your day, peace.